Hey, this is John Fernay, the co-host of the Maryland Crabs, and I am here today with a Maryland Crabcake for your listening pleasure. What's a crab cake? It's not quite a full episode, it's just a little snippet. Stay tuned and check it out. And make sure you check us out on themarylandcrabs.com. You can follow us on Twitter at MD Crabs Podcast, or find us on Facebook at the Maryland Crabs Podcast. And don't forget, subscribe, rate us, iTunes. Go there now. We're here at Anne Arundel Community College with Dr. Dan Nataf, who is you're the chair of the
director. That's my fancy title.
The director?
Yeah.
Of the
Center for the Study of Local Issues.
Well, we know Dr. Nataf from the semi-annual survey, which is of local issues as well as some national issues as well. And you are always the go-to for political insight within the county as well as the city of Annapolis as well. I know that you hosted our debates when we had the mayoral debates for the city of Annapolis, and I know that we've been on the podcast several times discussing different political issues. And the survey that you've just done for the spring survey was just completed last week. We just wanted to talk a little bit about the results that came out of there. And it was kind of interesting. I know that we had sent a request to our email list for people to participate into an online survey, which was separate from this because rightfully so, being the analytical doctor that you are, you wanted to make sure that that data was separate from other data to make sure it wasn't corrupted or whatnot.
Yeah, that was an experiment to see how different the two data sources would be in terms of the nature of the populations that they represented, as well as ultimately their answers on questions.
Yeah, I didn't tell you that my database was the entire Trump family, but that was
Well, if that's true, then they are way more liberal than the patriarch there.
The survey itself was pretty much what's happening in here, and you gave me some very brief summary data on it, which I thought was just, some of it was really fascinating as far as what's on the minds of the citizens of Anne Arundel County. Crime is up there, drugs, and the opioid thing is number one.
That does seem to be the thing, and we asked it a couple ways. One was just open-endedly, what's the most important problem facing the residents of Anne Arundel County, and drugs came in at 22%. Crime was another 8% over and above. And so that puts us around 30%. And it's been around 30% now for about a year and a half or two. And so I think you hit it on the nail. It's the opioid phenomena. And then the other question that we asked was drug use by high school students. And there it was a question of how serious a problem was that. And we had 60% saying it was very serious. And that the impressive thing about that is that it was a bipartisan agreement. There were many of these questions slant one way or the other, and you get, but on that one, it was there. The evaluation of the seriousness of the problem of drugs was universal across party lines.
I think the problem itself is actually knows no boundaries either. It's not unique to Serena Park or Glen Burnie or Brooklyn or Edgewater. It crosses all boundaries there, so the problem would be there. The other one that kind of surprised me on there was 14% was talking about the growth and overpopulation. Not that was a hot topic, but that it ranked so high.
Yeah.
Is that typical in these? Has that been one of the top ones in the past surveys?
It has been lately. If you go back 5 years, the economy was much more likely to be cited as the most important problem. Over time, the economy has drifted down. I think we were now at 7% citing it. It's been in the kind of middle-ish single digits for a while. But naturally, when it goes down from 30 or 40%, it frees up all these percents to go to other things.
Sure.
And so, education is a little bit up compared to where it was, environment, and growth and development is one part that has gone up. Now, the question is that mean that there's a real change in people's thinking about what priorities and problems are they facing, in the sense that when the economy had been at 30 or 40%, did that mean that they no longer cared about growth and development?
Sure.
Or it was just that it was being overwhelmed by this focus on the economy? So once you pull the economy out, well, all these others are coming up. But I do think that if you add other elements that are sort of linked, like we have different coded responses, and so one coded response is the environment, something about the environment, and so that's that. Or there's transportation. So if you put growth and development over population, that's one code. Transportation and environment, those are two other codes. You put those all together, you're hitting about close to 30%. In terms of people who are saying something about a quality of life kind of phenomena. And so between that and drugs and crime, you've got almost 2/3 of all your responses. And so that's what people are, those two things are driving people's concerns right now.
Well, I looked at, when I talk about the environment, and the buzzing that we're hearing is out of the Arundel Center, okay? And County Executive Pittman won an election on environment, and let's get development, let's get growth in check.
Yes.
That was a pretty big mandate. I mean, he's moving forward with that pretty strongly. And as I looked through the results of this, there were a couple questions that sort of stood off for me on that.
Uh-huh.
They want to do it, but they don't want to do it at the cost of anything. And I thought that there would be some more support for different things as far as on the local issues. And I think let's see.
We asked some questions about things that he was doing, initiatives that he had undertaken to reach out to the public. And so we asked about him having town hall meetings, but these were mostly focused on the budget and not development issues per se. Only a third had heard of these meetings. And so, it's like all the effort that went into them, and only 3%. I mean, to my understanding, the perception he walked away with is that people have many needs, but they don't have much tolerance for generating revenues to fund those needs.
So he's got a little bit of a task ahead of him.
Well, that's either he kind of goes into it with a mindset that more revenue is needed, I'm going to find a way to do it. And so we had a couple questions about that. One question was about the raising the income tax. We asked whether or not people would support or oppose.
To bypass that, there was 52%, so they had opposed that.
Well, increasing the income tax, we kind of had an even split where the public was divided.
Right.
Yeah. There was a different one which said legally bypassing limits imposed by the property revenue tax cap to raise funds dedicated to public schools. That got only 34. So the raising the income tax is sort of generic. It doesn't say – it says raising revenue for revenues and other priorities. So it doesn't say that there's only this is for schools, whereas the second one did imply, I might have put it stronger upon reflection, dedicated only to public schools. I didn't say that. It said dedicated public schools, but that only got a third. So the others had a split sample. Half were willing to say yes to an income tax increase. Half were willing to say no. And that is kind of, it's not that bad. If you're Stuart Pittman, you're saying, okay, half and half. And so, it's not like it's 30, 60, against. And so, or 30 favorable, 60 against. And so I don't know. Maybe that's, if he can make a kind of coherent pitch about the things that would be funded, and people say, yeah, those things are things that should be funded. If the thing is sort of phased in a little bit at a time, you could say, well, maybe people won't toss him out because he's making a value proposition effectively. If they don't believe in it, or if they just got to go back to their partisan, starting points, then it doesn't help, right? I mean, it becomes just turnout. Yeah, you're back to that. It's a simple automatic. As my side comes out, blue wave, your side doesn't. Next time could be red wave. Oops, I lose. And so,
did this emphasis on the growth and development, has that shifted at all from when former County Executive Hsu was in charge?
Well, we asked the question, and I don't know that it was answered definitively in the results, but because I think many people said it was. So we asked, how confident are you, very, somewhat, not very, that the new county exec will better manage growth and development than in the past? And so we got 33% saying, yes, I do believe, 22% saying no, but a really large percentage saying, I don't know. And I looked at some of the open-ended comments, and a lot of people just said it's too soon. We can't really fully judge. We'll see what he does.
Which I think is probably very legitimate. If we've got, he's only been in office for 7 months now, June, December. No, not even that.
When was he inaugurated? Yeah. And so it's not been long.
December, so he's only been 4 or 5 months there.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. Overall, the respondents of the survey seem to think that the city or the county and the state are going in the right direction, which isn't really too big of a
that's not a big change from in the past, recent past anyway. Usually, I will say this, is that in spring of 15, which was the first survey we had done after Hogan's election, we noticed a really big jump in right direction numbers for the state. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's now, it used to be, when O'Malley was in last year, as we were looking at 30-ish%. And then right as soon as Hogan won, it went up to, I think it was 48%. And then it's drifted into the low 50s, sure, occasionally mid-50s. And it stayed there. And so there's an underlying reality that has occurred over time, with jobs and, affordability and many other things. And there is Hogan himself. And so between the underlying reality and the kind of the person who's symbolic of the state, this guy is running at 86% job approval. It's like you almost have to find somebody who doesn't like the guy.
There's got to be a picture of him kicking a cat someplace.
I think that the opposition research should find that picture because it would be devastating. But right now, he walks on water, even though he gets, he has vetoes and they're overridden and so forth. It doesn't seem to taint him. Maybe my sense of him is that he's got his mindset about how to govern is, I go with the majority. And if I think the majority's on this side, I'll oppose whatever it is. I won't do it on strong ideological grounds.
Right. And
so to that extent, he's always trying to figure out where the middle is and kind of calculating how to be there for many, if not all, issues.
He's done a good job. Well, yeah. One of the things that I also saw in here was you discussed about starting school later, and by later is after the Labor Day thing, and returning the power to the local school boards.
Right.
As we know in the recent session that the legislature turned around and said we want to return it to the local school boards. Hogan vetoed it, sent it back there. They did override it. Now it is thrown back into the laps of the local school boards. That is diametrically opposed to everything that the Hogan camp has said that people in Maryland have resoundingly supported having this start after Labor Day start for school. They have said that when they announced the executive order 3 years ago, and they've continued to do that even through this legislative session. And everybody I've talked to tends to be that way. And the people that have self-identified themselves on the survey tend to be the majority are either conservative or moderate, and the liberals are not.
That's big.
Not there. But when you ask that question, 57% were in favor of returning it to the local school boards.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was kind of an interesting opposition between.
Well, I agree with you.
And considering we're typically a conservative county.
Well, yeah, but what conservative means isn't so clear. Often conservatives think throw things down to the lowest level of government. That's closest to the people. And so and now that you have elected school board, it seems like why would you take that prerogative away? These are elected individuals now. They do have a little mandate to represent people. If in their judgment, managing the schools and it's everything it has to do, including the schedule calendar, they think it's just better to do it one way and not the way he wants. I think even conservatives wouldn't have a hard time with that as a concept. I think in that case, I would wonder about his polling and what question he's asking. If you ask the question, do you like the after Labor Day start, they may say, yeah, it's fine. If you ask them the question, would you prefer that local school boards decide, they may say, well, yeah, that too. So it may not be different as it sounds.
Right. Recently, the Community Foundation for Anne Arundel County did a survey or a study on poverty essentially poverty in the county. Uh-huh. And it was presented over, some of the results were presented over to Maryland Hall. And I know county executive has turned around and said, this is something we really need to do. There were some surprising results. And when you looked at, you had asked, they said, about personal circumstances in your survey, about the economic conditions that apply to your household, it said that 25% of them said it was hard to afford the cost of food and groceries, and taxes were too high in relation to government services provided and whatnot there. We look at how serious the problems are facing Anne Arundel County. We look at the high cost of living. Drug use among high school students is what you had said as well. So the high cost of living is there as well.
Right. And let me just say on that, I did in my analysis of all this, I did a crosstab is a procedure that separates out responses by men and women. Women are much more likely to cite things like hard to afford the cost of food and groceries. It's maybe they're doing more of the shopping and they realize what prices they're doing. There is a distinct quality by gender as to how people experience low income or income challenges.
That's just a perception?
I don't know if it's a perception or a reality. You know, it could be that there are more single women or single heads of household who are women, and thus they are trying to make ends meet and putting their situations together as best they can. Or it could be, again, the idea that they're the ones who are doing the shopping for the household. And maybe, you know, they kind of say to themselves, here, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, I spent $200 a week. Now I'm spending $400. And it just like they'd hit some more squarely. We also know that those conditions, the conditions that like whether somebody is saying it's hard to afford the cost of education or health care insurance is unavailable, too expensive, or inadequate, those things are also affected by people's family income generally. Mm-hmm. So I usually break it down to 75, people 75 and lower, and then over 75. And you'll see some notable upticks and the percentage is saying, I've experienced it's not a good thing, whatever it is, you know, the perception of affordability. We have a thing here. It says received a salary increase or other increase in income lately. People under $75,000 are much less likely to cite that. And so their incomes aren't rising in the same way that people in higher income groupings are. And so it sort of compounds the problem of affordability and, you know, just the difficulty of making ends meet on a regular basis here in the county.
You talked about, there's another question. Your question 15 was, which party, Democrats or Republicans, do you trust to do a better job in coping with the main problems the nation faces over the next few years? I thought that was kind of interesting. In I'd say the majority said, the 37% said Republicans.
That has stayed the same for a couple of iterations. When we've done these, when there has been a shutdown of government, it tends to go down. Now, there was a shutdown of government, and here, oddly enough, it didn't seem like the Republicans were being blamed for it because their number was no different than last time when there wasn't a shutdown. And so what it is about, you know, and these numbers don't move a lot, generally speaking. The Democrats were at 37%. Last time they're at 34%. This time they may go back to 37. Republicans will drop to 35 or something. The numbers are not that fluid. Other than this, the generalizations I make is that in election years, the percentage of people who say neither party goes down. People polarize back into their inclination, you know, like unaffiliated voters are leaners. About half of them are lean one way or the other. The others are, there's another half that are genuinely unaffiliated and claim they don't lean. In off-year polling, the neither category rises, and this then diminishes the relative percentages given to each of the parties. And then when there's an election year, the parties get trust a little bit more, but, you know, the people are getting into their camps.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I thought that was interesting, though. They said that 37% of it, but 42% of your respondents identified as Democrats.
Yeah, there's going to be conservative Democrats that are, you know, very weak. We ask about how strong a Democrat you are, very, somewhat, not very. Right. And the people who are not very strong Democrats, they'll vote more for Trump than they
swayed on an issue.
They're not loyal to the party because of a tribal instinct. They're loyal to some perception of their values and governing and so forth and so on. So there are times, you know, if they see that, for example, that the radical left wing of the Democratic Party is on an upswing, well, these are not ideologically left people. They're moderates to conservative. And, you know, Bernie Sanders isn't their cup of tea. And so to the extent that they see Medicare for all and all these kind of really big picture items that are being brought forth in the Democratic sort of primary, the nominating process, they may say, well, that's going too far one direction. I don't know that I'm still one of them, and I don't trust them. And so now, again, the Republican Party, neither, when you're looking at 37%, this is not exactly a badge of courage, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, 50%, 55% would be, there's clearly a mandate. This is like, okay, which of these two groups is doing the less bad job at any given point? And
it's a horrible barometer.
It's not one that makes you feel comfortable with the future of America. It's just you're still saying that most people are frustrated. Not most people, because if you add 2 times 35 is 70, so there's only 30% that are kind of I don't know or neither. So most of them are in a camp.
Do you personally see a time where there is a legitimate third party introduced into politics?
The challenge for third parties is sort of the process of getting on the ballot and the single member district phenomena, where it's not the vote is the highest vote getter in a district, and for congressional, really at every level, right? And what we do is we also compound the propensity for people to do the lesser evil, because obviously if only one person's going to get elected, you're going to vote for the person who you dislike the least, because to vote for the one you really like, Ralph Nader versus Al Gore, could have deleterious impacts far beyond just having Al Gore instead of Ralph Nader, right? And so the Electoral College does that, single-member districts do it, and just administrative rules of trying to run as a third party. It's a challenge to see how it ever would come about. There's probably a lot of people in the middle who would vote for a middle party if they could. But, the theory of the two-party system is that that most of voters are in the middle and not at the extremes. And so that each party will be center right, center left. Right. But they'll always want that cluster of voters somewhere in the middle. And so
it makes sense. You nibble away at the center and hope you get enough
people on the edges, yeah.
One of the things I noticed on your survey, it was interesting on the demographics on this, and 75% of the respondents were 50 plus. Yeah. The income was 100 to 150,000 was the majority, and then as you look at the prime responses in zip codes, it was Annapolis 21401, Severna Park, Arnold, and 21122, which I think is Pasadena, maybe.
I think so, yeah.
And I thought that was kind of interesting because you've got 4 very affluent areas. Pasadena has sections, as does Annapolis, that are not necessarily as affluent as the rest, but they tend to be most affluent there. You also look at the other demographic that they're married, college educated. I was just curious as to why is it the old married people that are that are getting the surveys, or is that just the way the dice rolled? Or?
First of all, there are a lot of complicated things that are true about how surveys are done. Different types of ways of administering a survey will produce different outcomes. Also, only 23%. Again, if you add that up, you might get to 50% of people who are making $100,000 and over. But that means a half are making under $100,000, right. And the median family income in Anne Arundel County, I think, is close to $90,000. So that's not so far off.
Right.
And look, I think it's really hard for pollsters to tap into young people, into renters, into minorities, people who are downtrodden, disadvantaged, people who are, who hang on their cell phone only households. I mean, those are, and a lot of those are overlapping.
Has the cord cutting really hampered any kind of?
Oh, completely. Yeah, it's made it almost impossible to get people, under 40. Because they're the most likely to have sort of formed a household during the time in which cell phones were more or less ubiquitous. And so
having babies today, you get them a pack of diapers and a cell phone.
A social security number and a cell phone number, 2 things they'll never leave, right? It's a challenge to try to get a true cross-section of the population. And, this is why the polling industry is now in turmoil about how to actually administer polls. There are a lot of people who are trying to do it only online, just like with your subscribers. And the challenge is that it depends on the unit you're trying to capture. So with your subscribers, I haven't looked exactly, but my impression is probably a lot of them are close to Annapolis in some way. Mm-hmm. So if I'm trying to get Anne Arundel County and I need Glen Burnie and I need West County and all that, it's going to be a challenge to get that in proportion.
Sure.
So, I can then go to phones and, that, especially with landlines, we know where you live. And so we can, when we sample off listed numbers and even guess at some unlisted numbers, we have a much better chance of doing a good geographic spread. With cell phones, again, you don't know if the person...
You don't know. You've got a California number.
Anything could be true, right? Years. And so, I can actually get cell phone numbers. It's not that I can't get them. The problem is that it takes a lot more effort to get a cell phone completion than it does to get a landline completion, because landlines, the person's at home. They're not driving. They're not anywhere else.
Why would somebody be more hesitant to do it on a cell phone than a landline?
It's not that they're more hesitant in principle, although they may be, because I think people have a sense that cell phones are more sacrosanct in terms of junk calls than landlines. But I think that because cell phone users they can be anywhere when you call them. Even if that at night they could be out to dinner, they could be watching movies somewhere, they could be taking a walk. Anything's possible. If it's a landline, they're at home. They're not going to answer if they're not home. So you had a better chance of someone being in a relaxed, more or less situation and be willing to spend 10 minutes on the phone. Moreover, I think the perception of cell phones is that only people I know are going to call me, at least mostly. There could be a random commercial call or something, but mostly it's people I know. So if you see a number come up on caller ID and it says Anne Arundel Community College,
send it to voicemail.
I'm saying I'm not going to waste my time with that. There, some will take it, and that's great. But when I first started this job, we were getting a little bit over 5 completions per student per night, and now we're down to 3. And so that means the same number of students are generating 60% of the number of completions we've had. So that's why we've had to overlay the phone sample with the online sample, which is predicated on having people opt in at the end of the phone call. And so it's an opt-in.
Well, I know you do ask for email addresses toward the end of the survey if you would be willing to participate in future, and that's presumably for future online surveys.
Right.
Is there a thought to be asking for cell phone number?
There are some other methodological issues here. Do you want to have kind of a panel on both sides? So with the email group, I essentially have a panel. So that's just people who are getting used to answering these questions, and they've seen them before, and maybe there's a process by which they're not as fresh to the question each time when we call when they're asked. And so there could be a tainting effect. And so if I was to call the same people as well as have them in the panel online, then there's this habituation process that I'm not sure that would be as reliable. I think that for all the problems in the methodology, and as I say, that this is true in general, that a lot of big companies now are doing online only or online mostly surveying, and that's possible if you have a big pool of email addresses that you can use to solicit, right?
I get that.
But if you haven't got that pool, how do you generate it? So now you go into Facebook or Mechanical Turk on Amazon and other sources, and they're fraught with problems.
I see your challenges. And I know that when we solicited people to participate on the online survey, I was very clear to say, okay, this is a survey and it is going to take you about 15 minutes to complete. So I wanted to make sure that it was not like question 2. Question 3. Oh my God, how long is this going to go? Because I think anybody would complete the survey is like, if it's a 2-button, yes, I vote for Annapolis, best city in the world, and off you go.
Right.
But that's not going to give you there. One thing, and I should have mentioned this, and I am on the on your panel that helps discuss this as before the survey is done.
Right.
And one thing I should have brought up, and I'm kicking myself in the ass for this, that I would like to see, if you're willing to take a suggestion after the fact, but to find out what the housing situation is. We look at the poverty that we've got in the county, and people saying affording this and that and everything else. It'd be kind of interesting to know what is their living situation. Are they living in a single family home? Are they living in a duplex? Are they living in an apartment? Are they living in a condo? Do they own, rent? Or is there some other sort of an arrangement? Do we have a 35-year-old with his PhD that is living in the basement?
Yeah,
And I think that might be kind of interesting to see, and I think that might be a good way to
Here's I have asked that in the past in some form, and so it's not like that hasn't crossed my mind. I think, though, if you're trying to study the phenomena at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, you're back to who's participating in surveys. It's mostly not poor people. And so people who would be living in the basement, they probably have a cell phone, and again, they're not going to be very easy to get. And if they're homeless,
they're probably playing World of Warcraft.
I'm not sure about that, but I can definitely say that it is a challenge. I remember one of the first projects I ever did here. This was, I think, in '96, was to work on behalf of the local management board, which was interested in getting information about people who had experience with the Department of Social Services and with juvenile justice. And we found out that there were, I think it was 30 streets in the whole county where the clients of DSS were clustered. And if you could get the numbers of those people, you could actually target them, and you might have a reasonable chance of getting enough respondents to participate in the poll who would actually have experience with DSS. But if you didn't know that, somehow we had to find out what those 30 streets were and then pull from a database of listed numbers. So, again, nowadays, those listed numbers would all be cell phones, and the streets wouldn't yield. It's much harder to find the linkage between an address and a cell phone, as we've said.
Sure.
And so we would be hard-pressed to do it. So nowadays, a lot of people who are doing surveys are kind of doing mailed surveys because it goes to an address.
Okay.
Right? And so if you're not in a rush, right, because we do these here at the center for clients who are like nonprofit organizations who have different roles in the world, and sometimes they need to survey their clients. And it's always it starts off. We have one where we do it by mail first. And then we call questionnaires are coded so that we know who's responding. We don't try to figure out what they're saying. So it's just a matter of knowing, check,
that
yes,
they
haven't responded. And so then we call a subset of them. And, we get out of the 3,000 clients, we'll get about 550 on the mail alone, which is not bad. That's a pretty high response rate. I mean, this is a group that knows the envelope contains the entity's name, and it's not the Center for the Study of Local Issues. So it goes out, and then we are able to add another couple hundred on the phone using the method I just described. So in that case, because it's a finite group with known contact information, we can kind of
figure out,
get to them with greater alacrity. But what the general public, it's just getting more and more fuzzy as to how best you can actually get to them. One of the arguments, just to finish up, since you got me on methodology, with your survey, with your group, right? The real question will be, can we weight your group to make it look like my group when I weight it? Because I get too many female respondents, I get too many highly educated people. The party stuff comes out okay by and large, but gender and education don't.
Okay.
And so in your group, the first time I looked at it, there were too many Democrats. And so if we weight by gender, party, and education, will that produce results similar to what mine are produced by this other method, right? And if so, there are people who think that weighting, if you have a big enough pool and you just weight in the pool, all the problems of probability theory and, the non-zero chance of being included by some method of processing. I mean, the classic stuff that you hear in survey methodology theory, maybe that doesn't matter. And so we're in a kind of brave new world.
Yeah.
Now, again, it would have to be, if it's an area, you'd have to kind of have the problem of the area if you're tapping in equally. So, that database would have to be a pretty timely and good one to make it work. But, once I have a moment, I'm going to go to your database and see what happened, to what extent. and it also assumes some issues are very localized. And so, if you have agriculture issues, you won't have them in Glen Burnie so much, but in South County you will. And if, you have issues of, I don't know, maybe crime issues, they'll be more acute in North County than in South County and so forth. So there's where you're losing stuff. But there'll be other questions that are kind of county-wide that where you live isn't going to matter a whole lot. Maybe the drug abuse thing is one of those. And so you might be able to get okay information about things that don't have a strong localized effect, and maybe that's better than nothing if that's your only choice.
Could be.
Yeah.
I noticed the final thing before we wrap up. I noticed that you had 82% of the respondents were white.
Yeah.
And 6% African American, and 3% were Hispanic or Latino, and 1% Asian. But I mean, the Latino population in Anne Arundel County is booming.
I don't know if there's recent American Community Survey stuff that tells us what that number is. I'd be surprised if it was more than 5%. We're down more.
I'll take a look.
We're more down on African American. That number should have been closer to 13%.
Yeah, I would have. Be interesting to see how you can engage the other.
Yeah, but again,
the challenges that you're facing.
That's it. The challenges I'm facing don't have easy resolutions. They're just challenges that there's not much you can do with. I mean, if a Latino population is Spanish speaking, well, I don't have any Spanish translation service that I can rely on. So if they say, if they hear, "Hello, I'm a student calling from Anne Arundel Community College," take the survey, they're going to go, "I don't know, no hablo inglés," and I'm sorry, So they kind of tune out right there. And then I think in the African American population, I think that there is probably the challenge there will be particularly with landlines. Maybe some reluctance to answer a survey generally, but I think the landline issue would be more acute there.
Problem.
And so, yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Anything? You've been doing this for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Did anything in your spring survey surprise you?
Surprise.
Does anything surprise?
Yeah. I mean, you get jaded over time. You go, okay, there it is again. I guess I was interested mostly in the county exec stuff. Is it, do people kind of fall back into their partisan camps and perceive things more or less uniquely that way? Or is there anything that leadership can do that would surmount that and make people think that the possibility of greater trust or better outcomes by the virtue of actions and maybe personality and so forth? That's, to my mind, the great enigma at this local level, because we always hope we're not just bottled up in our tribal camps, but I'm not so sure that there's a lot of people fluid in the middle that are susceptible to persuasion, and to say, yeah, you did a good job, no matter what, kind of Hogan-esque, right?
Sure.
Hogan-esque. I mean, everybody's goal would be to kind of figure out what the magic elixir in Larry Hogan's approach to governing is.
Especially everybody that lost last November.
Yeah. I mean, there's all the people who were Hogan endorsed didn't make much difference, right? And so it's Hogan is maybe a one-off, right? Just that's him. And there's whatever the guy. But, Phil Scott in Vermont and the other guy in Massachusetts, whose name will escape me, but it'll come back. I mean, they're red governors in blue states. And so there is a strategy there of how to govern, how to get elected on the one hand, and how to govern as a kind of, red but very moderate person who then is able to work with supermajorities in the state legislature to actually not seem like it's stymied, to just stop. Just like the Ehrlich years looked more like that. It was an obstruction and more like D.C., right? Everybody's in there in a zero-sum way, and they're all trying to stop things from happening. With Hogan, that's not been the perception, and to some extent the reality. We'll see if now with Mike Bush's passing, how important a cog in that wheel he was. Hogan did say that. And Kipke was actually in the paper, I think, this morning, saying something like he always listened to us, Mike Bush, and gave us a chance. He didn't ram stuff down. Well, if there's somebody who's a little less collegial and more partisan that becomes the speaker.
Be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and then how that plays out for Hogan as well. So there's a lot of unknowns. How much personalities play a role?
I would suggest that the fall survey will be very interesting because we will have we will know who the new Speaker of the House of Delegates is. We will know who the new delegate for
That's true.
District 30 is.
Right.
We will know whether County Executive Pittman has raised taxes or not.
Yep.
To what degree, whether they're happy. I know that if you had done this just after Mayor Buckley had raised the taxes last year, they would have strung them up. But it'll be very interesting. And we've just really sort of skimmed over the surface of this in the last 30 minutes or so. But there's an awful lot of data that goes in underneath this. And I do, if you want a fascinating look into Anne Arundel County, take a look at this. We're going to have the full results of the survey posted. It's a big, long PDF.
Right.
Where you can actually see exactly
a lot of longitudinal stuff and a lot more detailed analysis. And,
Yeah, I want to say see what your neighbors are thinking because, but certainly not to the point where you can actually see what your real neighbor is thinking, but just, in the figurative sense.
Right.
But take a look at it because it's really fascinating. I think some of the data that the Center for Study of Local Issues comes up with, is fascinating.
Yeah.
And a lot of things that you don't necessarily think about.
And
it's interesting how
you won't find it anywhere else. And that's the other side. It's just we're a sole source for this type of information.
That is true, and I think you're a great source of information for Anne Arundel County. Been here, you said 25 years.
Yeah.
And how long have you been doing the survey for?
Well, this was something that I stepped into. In other words, the center had previous directors, and they'd come up with the idea of doing a survey every semester as partly for pedagogy and partly for community outreach. And so that had been ongoing roughly since 1980. And I came in, the first survey I did was in fall of 95.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, I guess coming year will be my 25th year. Yeah, it's not quite. That'll be 24, I guess.
That's why you're not a math teacher.
Well, never do math in public, right? But the point is that we're trying to survive and adapt to a changing world where we can still provide pretty helpful information without doing things that we are not capable of doing.
You've got to keep up. You've been doing an admirable job. I do recommend everybody dig deep into the data. Take a look at it. It's fascinating.
Sure.
Dr. Dan Nataf, thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and congratulations on another survey. And I guess we'll see you in about 5 months when we start thinking about the next one.
Okay, John. Thanks a lot.
This has been the Maryland Crabs podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them in all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.